you need to make a choice. Which subculture are you going to live in?
Right.
If you decide you want to live in one of the others, do so. Our culture is honesty and integrity. And if you can't accept that and you want to live in a different subculture, resign now and allow the rest of us to live in our culture of honesty and integrity.
I'm curious, how did the new hires respond to that?
You know what happened? People came to me afterwards and said, Mr. Orane, I feel so safe now. I feel safe because I know I'm surrounded by people who share the same common values I have. And that's the power of common values. And so the second one I wanted to talk about was another cultural phenomenon that we saw emerging, and that is people coming late to meetings. And, so, traffic. But of course, I noticed the people coming from Old Harbour and St. Mary were the earliest ones there.
Right, because they want to be on time.
Well,
they were prepared.
It's a matter purely under our control. So we said, this can't go on any longer because also there's been an obsession with punctuality, as I said earlier, in the company from its very inception. We said, okay, from Monday, everybody's going to be on time. And if you're not on time, we're going to lock the door. You can't come into the meeting or you can't come into wherever the work is going on.
And I can think of a couple international examples as well. I mean, you gave us Grace's template, but I think of, for example, how we used to develop film and where we are now. And the companies that would have done that, they did not adapt, they did not innovate.
Exactly.
And so they're no longer here. So the relevance, right, that is a part of purpose.
Okay, so just a corollary to add to that. The world has sped up and is exponentially moving faster.
Yes.
So 10, 20, 30 years ago, there was more time to adapt. Today, you have to adapt virtually every week, every day. With AI coming, it's going to be a massive change in the way the society works and businesses. So we need to make sure that every organization is vastly more agile than it used to be.
That's the buzzword now, agile. Have to remain agile. Welcome to the People Matter podcast, where we shine a light on the professionals shaping the future of work in Jamaica and beyond. Powered by the Human Resource Management Association of Jamaica, this series brings you real stories, expert insights, and impactful conversations with leaders who are transforming workplaces, industries, and lives. I'm your host, Melissa Anderson, and today's conversation is one you don't want to miss. Our guest today is the Honorable Douglas Orane, retired chairman and the CEO of GraceKennedy, who led the company's transformation into a global consumer group and helped embed purpose and strong corporate governance at its core. For today's conversation, we will call him Doug. A respected business leader, author, and advocate for youth development, Doug continues to champion nation building and entrepreneurship across Jamaica. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, the Honorable Douglas Orane. Doug, welcome.
Wonderful to be here, Melissa.
There's growing backlash globally to DEI initiatives, diversity, equity, and inclusion. But here in the Caribbean, we have our own unique challenges and cultural dynamics to unpack. Doug, what does it really mean to be purpose-driven as an organization?
There is one reason to be purpose-driven, and that is to satisfy the unmet needs of our customers. Think about it. Why else would they buy anything from us if it didn't help them to run their businesses or consumers to have a life that they would like to live? So we need to have that as top of the list. If we do that well, then our shareholders benefit, our employees benefit, the society benefits, and everything is okay. But there's one issue besides that, and that is how to adapt to change. I'm going to give you an anecdote from my early career when I was in my early 30s at GraceKennedy. The then chairman, Carlton Alexander, bless his soul, he used to get all of us in a room, young people, and just have a rap session. He says, young people, you ever heard of these companies before? And he'd name off 8 or 10 different companies. And I said, no, I don't recall any of them. Only one, Bryden and Evelyn.
Right.
And he said, when I joined GraceKennedy as a young man, every one of them was bigger than GraceKennedy. And today, they do not exist. Gone.
Right.
So it's a wake-up call for us that the organization needs to be purpose-driven to meet the needs of a changing society.
Right.
And so a question is, then how come GraceKennedy has done it? After all, we were founded in 1922, and so we're 103 years old. How was that possible? Well, we actually did some research on it, and we found there are 4 reasons why we were able to do it. But it's not unique to GraceKennedy. Any company can do it. So folks who are watching, get out your notepad. What are they? 1, our values. 2,
Yes.
protecting our core businesses. 3, we're going to make sure that we innovate effectively, what we call innovating at the edges.
Right.
And 4th, effective succession management. So I want to give you some examples of it that whoever is watching can say, oh, that resonates with me. Let's take our values. So GraceKennedy, we're known for Grace We Care, and we really mean it. It's something that's central to our lives in that regard. The other things that are so important is a sense of honesty and integrity. There's one other issue that is so important in GraceKennedy. I just mention it because it's very dear to my heart.
Right.
Punctuality.
Okay.
We're obsessed with punctuality.
Time is important. Time is money.
Well, it's more than important. It's impossible to become wealthy unless you're punctual. Because how can people trust you if you're not punctual? Sure. And that's an issue in our wider society. When we come to the section about living in the Caribbean, we can explore it a little more.
Right.
So that's values. Now, what about building a strong core? Well, what GraceKennedy did was to build it in food and then later in financial services. And we have said we do everything to make sure that we are always serving our customers' needs. So, for example, one of the things that I love to go out and visit customers. Whenever I went out to visit customers on a weekend, it was virtually a hobby for me.
So as CEO, you would go and meet your customers?
Yes. And if you look in my book, I have a photograph of me in Southern Clarendon with a small shopkeeper who said, Mr. Orane, what you doing here? I said, I've come to look for you to make sure we're looking after you in the way you want. And you know what he said?
Touch from the
he
top.
says, I've never seen anybody else from any other company.
Right.
So this is what gave us a distinctive competence in the marketplace, which returned a competitive advantage.
Right.
One of the things I learned from Carlton Alexander, he never screened his calls. Anybody could phone him. And he said, all of you in here, you don't screen your calls either. We must be open to the wider society, to customers or anybody else, because a complaint is a gift. After all, if somebody complains, I could have kept silent, and then we would never know that we weren't doing what we ought to have done. So one way of protecting and growing our core businesses, we saw in the 1990s, the massive changes in our society and the world. So we developed the 2020 vision and launched it in 1996, which is to become a global consumer group by the year 2020. Now, why did we do that? It is in order to be forward-looking so that we have a star in the distance, saying that is what we're aiming for. When we launched it, somebody said, but it's not too far in the distance. No, it isn't. No, it's 5 years in the past.
Right.
But it also energized the entire company where people said, oh, this is what we want to go for. We want to become a global consumer group because Jamaica is too small for us and we need to keep growing in order to, guess what? Improve the standard of living of every employee.
Right.
And we actually set an objective to double productivity in 5 years between 1996 and 2020. And guess what happened?
What's that?
We did it in 4.5 years.
Okay.
So, because the energy that it generated to where people said, we're really onto something here. That's what being purpose-driven is all about. So I've covered 2 of the items.
Right.
So the third one, innovating at the edges. What does that mean? It means that we are very aggressive entrepreneurially, always trying new products and services, but very conservative financially. Because we know that if we do something, 2 things can happen. It either succeed or it fails. If it fails, we don't want it to bring down the entire company. And so therefore, we're very particular that risk is managed accordingly. And there are many examples of us doing it. Typically what happens though, people only see the successes, they don't see the failures. But folks, that's the way life is. There are lots of failures and we need to prepare for
We
it.
learn a lot more from the failures and the success.
Absolutely,
Yes.
absolutely. And then the fourth one, which is very special to me, is effective succession management. Why is it special to me? Because I see so many companies grappling with this and not coming to terms with it. So what I did was to say, look, we have to have succession at every level. You need to have at least 2 or 3 people who are being groomed for every single job so that there is a choice. And also to let them know that they're potential successors. Mind you, they don't know who else is a successor because that's kept confidential.
In mind of.
And as a result of that, whenever there is somebody retires, there's always a choice. When I retired, we had choices, and Don Webby was the best choice. But now he has retired. Now we have Frank James, and he was the best choice. But there are lots of other choices there. So you have to ask yourself, do this test in your company. Who are your successors?
And
are you
preparing them?
How are you preparing them? And also, you need to have a formalized way of doing it, which is where the HR professionals come in. Because if you're an executive, you don't have the time to go and develop a detailed succession plan. And it is as important to develop those succession plans as to put in a piece of new machinery in your factory or launch a new financial service product. So to summarize then, purpose-driven means always adapting to whatever is happening and where everybody in the company has a clear view of where you're going. And I'll summarize by saying what somebody had told me yesterday, a young person who said this to me. They said, if the rate of change outside of our company is faster than the rate of change inside, you're in big trouble. Because you're likely to end up like the companies Carter and Alexander mentioned, you'll be out of business.
Well said. And I can think of a couple international examples as well. I mean, you gave us Grace's template, but I think of, for example, how we used to develop film and where we are now. And the companies that would have done that, they did not adapt, they did not innovate.
Exactly.
And so they're no longer here. So the relevance, that is a part of purpose.
Okay, so just a corollary to add to that. The world has sped up and is exponentially moving faster. So 10, 20, 30 years ago, there was more time to adapt. Today, you have to adapt virtually every week, every day. With AI coming, it's going to be a massive change in the way the society works and businesses. So we need to make sure that every organization is vastly more agile than it used to be.
That's the buzzword now, agile. Have to remain agile.
That word was not in the business lexicon when I was younger, but it is probably one of the most important words today to say we got to move and change no matter what is happening around us.
Flexible and adaptive. All right. Company values often come into focus during difficult times. When things are uncertain, people look for clarity and meaning. Doug, can you share a moment where your company values helped guide a tough decision?
Sure, I'll be happy to do that. And it guided individuals who are in the company to do the right thing. So what did we do in that regard? Somewhere in my career, midpoint at GraceKennedy, I noticed that the emergence of different subcultures in our Jamaican society. And it became very concerning because, of course, we wondered how would it affect how we functioned internally. So one of the things that I always did was to go to the induction sessions that we had for our employees, new employees coming in, maybe once every 2 months or so, and I'd have a rap session with them. And this is what I said to them. And people in advance said, Doug, you must be crazy to say something like this. And I said, it's needed. So this is what I said to these new employees. I said, I've noticed that there are different subcultures that have emerged in Jamaica. There's the informer for dead culture. There's a culture of silence where you see things going wrong and you say nothing.
Right.
And there's a culture of honesty and integrity. Now, you're a new employee. You need to make a choice. Which subculture are you going to live in?
Right.
If you decide you want to live in one of the others, do so. Our culture is honesty and integrity. And if you can't accept that and you want to live in a different subculture, resign now and allow the rest of us to live in our culture of honesty and integrity.
I'm curious, how did the new hires respond to that?
You know what happened? People came to me afterwards and said, Mr. Rain, I feel so safe now. I feel safe because I know I'm surrounded by people who share the same common values I have.
Yeah.
And that's the power of common values. And so the second one I wanted to talk about was another cultural phenomenon that we saw emerging, and that is people coming late to meetings. And, so traffic. But of course, I noticed the people coming from Old Harbour and St. Mary were the earliest ones there.
Right, because they want to be on time.
Well,
right. They were prepared.
It's a matter purely under our control. So we said, this can't go on any longer because also there's been an obsession with punctuality, as I said earlier, in the company from its very inception. We said, okay, from Monday, everybody's going to be on time. And if you're not on time, we're going to lock the door. You can't come into the meeting or you can't come into wherever the work is going on.
Wow, strict measures.
Absolutely. We never had to lock a door.
Okay.
Because everybody said, oh, okay, I'm going to behave differently. So everything now runs to the minute, to the second. And it shows that it's one way of increasing productivity. It is something that I think the wider society really needs to reflect on and say, hey, this is a simple way we can increase productivity.
Right.
Because punctuality is just a form of respect for other people. And what we hear people saying all the time, them are diss me. Them not respect me.
Well,
one of the ways to respect
on time.
Right, is to say,
yes,
I'll be on time on everything I do. And of course, I tell people if you're going to be late, just phone in advance and say, I'm sorry, I'll be there in 10 minutes. Simple. There's other one I would put in there, since we're talking about the use of time. And that is purely by chance, I read Colin Powell's autobiography, General Powell. He had a page in there about how he held his meetings all in 1 hour.
Okay. Okay.
And I said, I'm going to start using it. So we did. And shared it with the management, and it works.
So what was the impact you saw? So a 2-hour meeting versus a 1-hour meeting, the attention span, high impact, and you get action.
Meetings drift along, endless meetings, people lose interest in it. But if you want the 30-second synopsis of what Colin Powell said, he said, look, I choose the agenda, start on time, lay out for 5 minutes what we're going to do. And then I said to folks, okay, you can now speak for the next 20 minutes. You can go hammer and tongs at each other. Then after that, I said, okay, here are the alternatives we have. Which one are we going to choose? Another discussion for another 20 minutes. And he says, okay, I'm going to summarize. And this is what the decision is.
Right.
Full stop. End of meeting. And if anybody doesn't agree with this, they can go outside and complain.
Okay.
So it works.
It works. Yes.
And I hear people complaining about this all the time. So just a tip for how to handle situations like that. And it's all within the chairman's power to make that happen.
Right.
And of course, if somebody comes late and says, oh, I came late, can you go over everything else that I missed? Say, no, you should have come on time.
Right. So as the chairman and CEO, setting the tone that those values of integrity and honesty and punctuality, leading by example, your management team behind you doing exactly the same.
Exactly.
And so the employees seeing that model behavior just lined up, no challenges. And you were very direct in 2 of the actions you mentioned. Close the door if you're not on time. And if you're not on board with being an honest employee, no matter what you see out there in Jamaica, that is, like you said, the informal culture, or the fear of speaking up. right? They get a chance to choose. If you want to be a part of this organization, then you align with us. And it
Absolutely.
created psychological safety, which is one of the most profound things you said, is that creates a sense of belonging.
All right. So since we're on honesty and integrity, I'll share this. I believe it's impossible to compete globally unless you have a culture like that. Because why would anybody outside of Jamaica trust us
Right.
if your company didn't function in that way?
Right.
Because that's the way they're functioning elsewhere.
Right.
And we can come to it later about the difference between high trust and low trust societies I know we're going to talk about the Caribbean.
We evolve some more in this.
How the
Very
Caribbean has
important
evolved in
discussion.
that regard.
All right. Employees want to feel connected to something bigger, to understand how their work contributes to a greater purpose. How can managers and leaders engage employees around purpose in authentic, meaningful ways?
By being authentic. And what does that mean?
Yeah.
It means actually communicating with individuals. I had this experience and I've never forgotten it. We're having big issues with one of our companies. We got everybody at the conference center, 200 people. I was sharing with them how we need to compete. The trade union delegate came to me afterwards and said, Mr. Orane, you're not communicating. I said, what do you mean? I don't spend the whole day doing that. He said, no, you're informing.
Okay.
You're not listening. And so that's what we as leaders need to do, is listen carefully to what folks are saying. Now, we need help from our HR people. In what way? First of all, if you're the CEO, your chief HR officer should be your navigator. Like you're flying a plane, not somebody giving you statistics from last year. You want somebody who said this is the best way to communicate.
Yeah, strategizing with you.
Exactly.
Yes.
Then the other thing that leaders need is for HR to develop the tools in order to engage people. So that, for example, people want to be recognized, so recognition programs, performance measurement programs, incentive programs. So all of those things add up if they're done effectively.
Right.
But the leaders can't do it alone. Now, in terms of being engaging people, here are a few that I'll throw out.
Right.
Stop eating in your own office and go to the canteen and eat with the ordinary people in the business.
Yes.
They'll notice it. And on top of that, they'll say, oh, this is so different from what happened before.
Right.
In addition to that, one of the things is to actually engage people to listen to what their lives are like. The other one I would say that's crucially important, if it's not done already, is to have some form of outside counseling available for individuals.
Assistance.
So all of these things are in the HR menu that will help the organization to be more effective.
Right. I think what you said about active listening is so powerful because, as leaders, sometimes we have our agenda and we are speaking to, get a response, maybe even a predicted response, as opposed to actually listening to the employee voice, the spoken and unspoken word, creating channels for honest feedback. Because as leaders, we don't always get it right sometimes. We have to adapt and change. So I think that's powerful. Moving from the posture of informing, here is my agenda, I'm telling you what I want, and as opposed to listening and then changing maybe even the pre-planned outcome you had or strategy.
In our Caribbean culture, we need to be very aware that individuals very often don't like to speak with others listening. So the ability to have employees interact one-on-one is crucial.
Right. Smaller groups.
Absolutely.
Yeah, where people feel comfortable.
And then the other one is Caribbean societies, because we're post-slavery societies, are low-trust societies, which means that rank and file don't trust us.
Right.
That's the default position that they have. In a high-trust environment, if you're living in Norway or Canada, you wouldn't have to get concerned about issues like that.
Right.
But in our experience, we as leaders and management have to spend a lot more time building trust.
Yes.
Because the trust was destroyed 200 years ago. And so we need to be aware of that is a multi-generational issue that we need to resolve. And if you resolve it, that's how people become very productive and committed to the organization.
Right. Well said. So leaders have to be authentic themselves. I love that, active listening. Love it. All right, Doug, we're going to ask you to choose a question from the bowl and read it out loud for us.
Okay. Ta-da! If you would ban one corporate buzzword forever, what would it be moving forward?
And why is that?
Well, you could say in the future.
Right.
But it's a kind of filler for people saying, what do we do going into the future?
Right.
And it's become so common now. I don't know if it has much meaning.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the
All
reason why.
right, well,
But then the way the English language works, it's probably going to disappear in a few years and something else will pop up.
That's
because
right.
With Gen Z coming up through the ranks. to
Oh, they
become
have a
managers.
whole nother language.
Absolutely, and it will probably be an abbreviation that they'll use.
Correct.
They'll probably be saying, instead of moving forward, they'll say MF.
That's true. All right. That was the Honorable Douglas Orane. Doug, offering timeless insight on the power of leadership rooted in purpose, values, and people. His wisdom reminds us that building inclusive workplaces isn't about ticking boxes. It's about leading with intention, consistency, and heart. Thank you, professionals, for tuning in to episode 3 of the People Matter podcast. And of course, a special thank you to Doug for joining us today. We're just about halfway through the season, and trust us, we're only just getting warmed up. Don't forget to subscribe, follow us on social media, and drop a comment if you've got any thoughts or burning questions from today's discussion. Until next time, keep leading with purpose, and remember, your people are your greatest strategy.